Hello everyone, I hope you guys are doing well and I hope you had a wonderful day. If you just woke up, I hope you had a wonderful rest. And I am here to guide you as you create your very first groom with the new hair system. So let's get started. Here inside Blender we have our model which we're working on, and we also have this window opened and we've set it to geometry node. And if we want to add the hair system, we just go to add, curve, empty hair. So if you have the 3.2 to 3.4 version, you should be able to see this feature. So once you have that all set, you can select your curve and go to sculpt mode. This is where you can find all the tools that you need to use to create the guide hair. So the guide hair are basically parts which you create that you can now add modifiers, which we'll be talking about in a bit. My main goal with this tutorial is not to explain all these tools because they're quite self-explanatory, and I think you'll have more fun kind of playing with it. But I'll show you how you can access things quickly. So you have the add brush. It allows you add hair. You can see some of its property if you press N. By the way, you can press T to bring out this tool panel here, and if you press N, you can see the properties. And if you select any brush, if the property change, you can also access the property if you right click here and select show to settings, header, show to settings. So do that one more time, show to settings, and here you can access and tweak everything. Okay, so let's get into the main tutorial, because the goal for this video is to basically get you started with creating your very first hair groom. Okay, so what we'll be doing is before we start creating the main hair, we want to create our geometry system, and once we create that, we can easily iterate on different hair systems. Okay, so I'm going to grab the add brush and set the count to about 10. Ideally, you don't want this to be too much because we'll be adding children particles later. So if we go to the curve shape, we can see we can play with the length. So if you want longer hair, you can make the length longer. If you want more points, you could add more points here. The interpolate helps you kind of populate add more hair by copying the shapes, the length, and the distribution of the points of pre-existing guide hair. Okay, so let's quickly create a sample hair that we'll use to test out our system before we go into create the main one. Okay, so I use the add brush to add a bunch of hair strands. So now I'm going to use the comb brush to quickly relax this. So I'm using projected because I find it does a better job in kind of, if you're trying to move things everything at once, it does a better job. And then this sphere brush does a better job with kind of styling it individually. So they're both useful for different scenarios. So we'll just kind of relax it slightly. This is not going to be the final hair, it's just so we could create something. So this will be our guide hair for now, and let's go back to object mode. So I like to look at the way I look at the process for creating hair system are basically in 4 different stages. So the first stage, we have generating your guide hair. So this is what we've just done. We've generated our guide hair. The second stage is to generate children particles. So we don't want to have to render individual geometry. So we don't want to render 1 million geometry because it's going to make our computer run out of memory. We want to instance that with particles. So let's do that. So here in geometry node, we want to add a node. So we go to geometry and we want to duplicate elements. So basically we want to duplicate the existing curve which we just created and spread it, kind of simulating the children particles. So we will use this duplicate element node. So currently we cannot see anything because we need to switch this from point to spline. So once you do that, you can see your duplicated element. And now we can increase the amount of what we want to duplicate. And if we look, It seems like nothing is happening, but if we adjust the numbers, we can see some changes and stuff happening. What's happening is it has duplicated it, but they are still very compact. So if we have one strand, all the duplicate mesh are still within the parent strand, so we need to spread them out basically. And to spread them out, we need to actually distort the point. So for that, we'll be using set position. So we want to switch, we want to change the position of the duplicated element. So that's where we use the set position. So it's at this instance I will stop to say, just kind of a heads up, this is a very geometric node, seems very intimidating even to myself. I'm still learning it, but it's worth it. Like if you take your time to really understand it, it's definitely worth it. And I'll try to do a very good job in making sure you feel you don't feel very intimidated. So I will try to explain every single node as we go along. Okay, so we have the set position. As I mentioned, it's going to help us shift to make to kind of displace the duplicated element. Okay, so if we move this offset, we can see we are moving the entire hash strand. So we don't want that to be the case. We want to be able to move it randomly. We want to kind of scatter them randomly. So of course what we need now is a random node. Okay, so we go to utilities, that way you find this type of node. So we get the random value node. Okay, so we can plug this value into the offset. It works, but it's not ideal. So when you see this color code, this bluish, I don't know if I'm purple, I think it's purple, color coded entry node socket, sorry, that's the right word. It usually indicates a vector connection, so we want to switch this into vector. Practically what we're using for the curve system is basically vector, since curve and vector work well. I'm not really good with mathematics, but yeah, from the tutorials they tend to work better. Okay, so we switch the random value to a vector value. Initially it was float, but we're switching into vector, and we connect the vector to control the offset. So we can see it's working and looking much better compared to earlier. We're able to kind of get a more full result. But what's happening here now, we are getting kind of this noisy effect. So it's actually doing what we're telling it to do. It's basically we've gotten our duplicated element, we've kind of distorted the point, and it is displacing each individual points randomly. But that's not what we want. We want to be able to, rather than displace the point, we want to displace the position of each strand. I don't know if you're getting me. Let's do a visual explanation. So we have a Bezier curve, okay, and let's say we have a couple of Bezier curve. What we want is to displace individual curves. Okay, what we have currently is we are displacing each point like this randomly, so that's not ideal. So we want to be able to displace individual curves. So to do that, we need to get information about the curve, and the way to do that is we will search for we want to get the attribute, so we'll be capturing the attribute of the curve information. So like we did earlier, curves works better with vector, so we want to switch this value from float to vector, and then we don't want to displace the point. We don't want to get information about points, we want to get information about the spline. Okay, so now the random value should be connected here, and then this attribute should be connected to the offset. So what do we get now? If we move this, so unlike before, we are now displacing individual strands. Okay, so we are on the right track. Okay, so now you could use this value and kind of create like a children particle system, but it's not very ideal. So what we want to get is kind of like a value system whereby we move one value and every other thing moves along. Okay, so let's do that. We are going to add a utility math node. We'll set this to multiply. We'll set this to 0 for now and set this to -1. I don't know the maths calculation, but this is what I just watched, so this works. So we'll get this value and put it to the minimum, and then we'll add in the input a value node. Okay, so this value will be plugged here and this will be plugged here. So now if we move this value, we can get the similar effect which we get with the old particle system of displacing the children to make it feel full as expected. Okay, so let's go over what we did. So we added the input, we deformed it, we duplicated the element, we captured the information about the curve which we used to basically duplicate it, and this is what's kind of displacing the duplicated element, also feeding into the capture attribute, and then these nodes are helping us to basically make our scene more user-friendly. So you can look at this, you can copy, screenshot it, and use it for your own project, and with time you kind of it will start making more sense to you. Okay, so like I mentioned, I like to look at building a hair system in 4 stages. So we have the hair guide, which we did earlier, and now we created the children particles. Okay, so the next step is called modification, adding modifiers. So basically modifiers are used to apply changes on top of a pre-existing system. So we want to be able to modify it some more to get our desired result. So some effects which you find in modifiers is like clumping. You can find some kinks, like coily hair, braided hair, roughness of the hair. So those are modifiers we can apply on top of our particle system to get the result which we want. Okay, so let's add the first one. We want to add clumping. Okay, so when you talk about clumping, how does clumping work? Clumping is just basically scaling. So we have this nice cylinder, and if we want to clump the endpoint, we just scale this down in, we scale it in, and we kind of get the clumping effect. So let's recreate that. So let's get a vector math node. So like we spoke about when we're dealing with curve, we mostly just work with vectors. So we want to switch this from add to scale because we are looking to scale this. Okay, so next thing we need, so if right now if I scale this, we're scaling it as we see. But next thing we want is we want to be able to control where it scales. So like for the example which I showed you, we have the cylinder, and the length of this is where we get information. So in this length we know this is the top, this is the bottom. So we know that because we have information about the distance between them, so we can use that. So if we go to curve and search for spline parameter, so this will give us information for like the length and the factor of each particular strand. Okay, so one helpful tip which is like if you go to the curve and hold your mouse here long enough, you'll get some information about that particular node. So we have retrieved the number of evaluated points that will be generated for each control or each point of the curve. Okay, so now we want to use this spline parameter as a factor to the scale, and once we do that, you can see we have that clump effect. Excuse me. Okay, but it's working in the wrong direction, so we want to flip it. To flip it, there are several ways you can do this. You could you could use RGB curve and kind of play with it. It gives you that curve feeling. You could use this to flip it. You could also use color ramp, which is what I'm going to use now. So I'm just moving the black to the white and I'm just flipping them. You could also do it by going to here and flip color ramp, flip color ramp. Okay, so now you can play with this to kind of adjust how much clump you want. So let's reduce this slightly. So it's just playing with the style which you're going for and how much clump you need to be happening. Okay, so that's one modifier added. Another modifier which we can add now is to make sure that each root are connected to the surface, because if we look now, they are not connected. And this is one advantage of geometry node. It's like you have so much control that you can fix issues like this. I remember clearly, like in the previous version, it feels very frustrating when you add like children particles and they're not really connecting to the mesh. So we can definitely fix it here. So let's do that. So when we're looking to displace or adjust the position of curve like we did earlier, we use the set position node. So let's do that again. So I will grab the set position node, and we need information. So we're basically trying to apply like a shrink wrap system somewhat. So we need information about the head model. So we need to drag in this head model here and set it to relative. So this head model is basically the shrink wrap. So let's add the shrink wrap to aka the geometry proximity node. Okay, so we connect this and set it to position. So if we look now, it's kind of shrink wrapped itself on the geometry, but we don't want everything to be shrink wrapped on top of it. We want just the tip that is very close to the head cap. Okay, so to do that, we need to get information of the endpoint. So we can go into curve and search for endpoint selection. So sorry, the start point, we're trying to get the start point, but this endpoint selection node does it. So we want to set the endpoint, we leave it at 1 so we can see the effect we get. So this selection will be plugged here. So now if we go closely, we can see everything is seated on the head cap. And if we move this up, you can see it's still trying to snap on top of it. Okay, but what we notice, it's snapping both ends, so we don't want it to snap this end. So if we switch this to 0, it removes control over that. Okay, so that's what we want. So we want to set this to 0, so it's only worrying about the start point. Okay, let's do one more modifier. Okay, so let's add some displacement. By the way, if you want to have a more smoother preview of your geometry node, you can go to the render tab, search for the curve, and go to viewport display. So if you render this now, you will get a curve subdivision of 2, but if you want to preview it in the subdivision of 2, so you can kind of predict what the render will look like, you can always adjust these 2 values. So with the subdivision of 2, we can say it's smoother and everything is sticking on the surface. We could even adjust this value. Let's say we want to adjust the scale, we can adjust this. This can also be helpful, kind of tighten things even more. Okay. For the displacement, we'll also be using a set position. Like we mentioned, if you want to displace the position of a particular object, the set position helps with that. So let's use the set position, and then we'll add a texture, and we're adding a noise texture to be the displacement factor. Okay, so if we plug it to the offset, we can see it's working. The strength is just, the strength is too much, and yeah, it's kind of displaced very badly, so we need to adjust that. Okay, so we see how this look, and we want it to retain its position and only displace on its position. So we want to kind of zero out any unnecessary values that are adding to it. So we set this to add, and this is the value used, so negative 0.5. So it's going to zero out the position of the curve, which is what we want it to be, so that any displacement is just happening in that position. So we also want to control the kind of intensity, so we add a scale. We switch that to scale and set it to 0.1. So basically we'll be controlling the intensity with this node. Okay, so that's the noise modifier, and you can play with the scale. You can add more noise. If you want it to be smooth, you can just play with this value to make it more smooth. So that's the setup, and finally let's do the curve scale, the curve radius basically. So if we go to render and switch this to strips, we can see we can control how the thickness. So depending on what you're going for, you want to set it up nicely, and then we can set up material. Right. Usually you can also set material, and we call this hair. So this would be an ideal way to kind of add material for geometry node. Okay, so the next step now is to actually go in and groom our hair. So now we can probably hide this. We can hide this for now, or let's take it down, and here we can go into sculpt mode and basically delete all of this. So let's start working. So you can see we have our children particles showing nicely. So we can grab the comb. I'm going to use projected to kind of get it all to lay down nicely. So later you can go in and adjust things as needed. So usually I end up like not liking the very tapered end. So to fix that, I could this black value, I could just make it a bit brighter, and it fixes that. So we can use the slide tool and kind of slide things around. So this is one where I think the geometry is way better than the previous one, especially once they add the deflector so it doesn't penetrate. Since it doesn't really requires or cares about topology or geometry, it's like you can get away with more and have more creative freedom. Of course, there are certain things that I feel will kind of push this to the best it can possibly be, especially if there's kind of like a preset system for modifiers, so the user don't have to like create a whole brand new node. Of course, I suspect a lot of product will come out to solve this problem, but I think it would be ideal like if the Blender Foundation kind of give the users something to start up with, kind of like XGen. You just have those modifiers which you could just load in. Hopefully we'll see how things turns out. Yeah, so of course this is where the whole artistic interpretation comes in. This is where if you don't have a good grooming skill, it will come in play. You want to take your time, look at reference, basically patience and skills of experience will definitely help in pushing the end result. Okay, so I'm going to spend more time here. So we could use like some cool tools like the pinch tool. Set this to like 6 and start pinching stuff in. So it's a very nice way to create your own clumps. Okay, so next let's create another system. So I can just select this and add, let's go ahead and name the system hair 1. Okay, so I'll select this and add another curve, empty hair, and I can call this hair 2, hair 1, and for hair 2 I will just select the hair 1 curve system, and we basically copy all of that. And now select hair 2 and go into sculpt mode. We want this part to be shorter, so I'm going to set this add, and for the length I'm going to use 0.08, and now we just go ahead and draw in what we need. So you could use symmetry. If you just click on the X mirror, it's going to mirror everything. Okay, so once we're happy, we can grab the comb brush. So yeah, I'm definitely excited to start exploring this. I will for sure switch to geometry nodes for my future project for grooming. Because yeah, I was always skeptical about like joining. I was like always pushing it, but after I explored it in this past days for this tutorial, I definitely see its potential. Okay, so let's say for this side here I want to make it more smooth. I could make it its own hair system, and we can call this hair 2, and we just play with this. Set this to like 2, maybe 0, to make it more purely smooth. Kind of play with things. Okay, so once I'm happy, let's make sure I'm really happy. Grab the slide. So I really love the slide. I wish there'll be like a clone brush. That would be really cool. Or like somewhat a way to duplicate stuff. Okay, if you have like patchy areas, you can use the add with the interpolate length and shape and just fill it up. Okay, so I want to copy this. I can just set cursor to selected and origin to 3D cursor. So if I duplicate this, rotate scale X -1. So it's going to flip that, and I can just jump in and start working on it. So I'm going to use the 3D brush now, kind of get more finer details in. Make this flatter. Yeah, I really miss. This is definitely missing that interpolated, surface collision. So to prevent penetration of meshes. So yeah, so it's not perfect. I'll probably have to tweak it later. Yeah, so let's do the back, kind of what we did earlier. I'm gonna add like curve empty hair and copy particle system 2. Then we just comb it. Okay, it's not perfect, but we can kind of go from here. So if I switch to strip, let's see if everything is looking good. Okay, and can change the render particles to like 80. Then this will give it like 60. This is that stuff out. Just quickly enable my GPU. Okay, so yeah, we can start rendering stuff now to see. Set this to 80 focal length, and then 80 1920. So I'm just kind of creating portrait mode, and then let's set up the lighting. Okay, so for the hairs, I think I need to reduce the size of this one. So it's more thinner. So like, I think I got a question very long time ago. It's like someone's asking, how do you know if it feels right, or if what's the right amount of particle system to add or something like that. So you just know with time. And looking at reference, it's more like a feeling for me. Okay, so I will switch this to principal head BSDF, kind of a faster way to go about it. Roughness, I'll usually go with like 0.2, kind of get that shiny hair. I will also switch this from direct coloring to melanin concentration. Redness, probably 0. So to add more character, I'm gonna use some random color and also random roughness. Okay, so let's see what we get. So right off the back, it's not looking bad. Yeah, this is where like one will go in and start tweaking stuff some more. Well, overall it's looking good. Everything is connecting. It's rendering nicely. We can probably reduce this, making it feel like an afro. So let's set this to like 50, and I think we can increase the radius to like 0.2. So I'll copy this value and paste it here. So kind of have everything in unison. So let it do its thing. So this needs to be more scanty. I'm gonna make it 30. So it's kind of like a feeling. You just feel it out of how much it requires. And the awesome thing is like you can subdivide everything to even make it look more smooth. Increase the highest as the soft limit. Oh, you could go higher for render. So let's go with 4. See what we get. So for the next tutorial, I will be showing you how you can generate hair basically by drawing it. You can draw curves or even generate it with geometry, and I will be showing you guys how to achieve that. It's pretty straightforward actually. Yeah, so this is the result. Let's give it another view. Yeah, definitely needs some more cleanups and just kind of pushing the guide hair to behave as expected, but overall it definitely came out great, and I enjoy this workflow, and it just gives you more control. Hopefully in the future the system can be improved some more. And yeah, so that will be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you wish to see more from me, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and yeah, like the video if you enjoyed it, please, and comment. Yeah, list all the features which you want to see with Geometry Node, so the YouTube algorithm kind of push this video up. Okay, so bye bye for now, and see you next time.